Hi everyone and welcome to my channel where I explore everything I find interesting about the world of anime, and today I'm interviewing the renowned British anime and manga expert Helen McCarthy on the world of manga and her new book, The Manga Bible. She's had a long and interesting career, including writing anime The Beginner's Guide to Japanese Animation back in 1993. And this was the first English language book published that focused on the art form. To date, she has gone on to write 14 books all about anime and manga, including The Art of Osamu Tezuka, God of Manga, Hayao Miyazaki, Master of Japanese Animation, and 500 Essential Anime Movies. Helen's new book, The Manga Bible, is the definitive guide to manga, going all the way back from the very beginning in the 12th century Japan right through to the modern day. It's like everything you wanted to know about manga is in this book. So I hope you enjoy our interview. Can you tell us a little about yourself?
Well, I first started to be aware of anime and manga in 1981. And that was because I met a guy who had just come back from his graduation trip to Spain. He and his group were all fine art and illustration students. And like most people do, it was 81 was a while ago, but we still did the same things that people leaving uni do then. We wanted to go out, go away, let off some steam, enjoy ourselves with our friends. So they booked on a trip to go to Mallorca. And they were weird because this was a Club 1830 holiday. And in the Club 1830 has kind of faded into memory now, but it was essentially for people in that time of life who wanted sun, sex, and booze in vast quantities. Unfortunately, the five of these guys all wanted to actually see something of Mallorcan culture. So they had nothing against sun, sex, and booze. They just wanted to get into Mallorca. So they were going around the town where they were all staying, and checking out the bars and checking out the beaches, but also going down the streets and turning on the TV and trying to find out what people who lived there were doing. And one night they saw a Japanese animation marathon dubbed into Spanish. And it happened to be all giant robots. Now, France, Italy, Spain all got anime on TV in the late 70s. And it was a huge success, a word-of-mouth success. It was the TV authorities did it because it was cheap, but the audiences embraced it because it was something completely different. And they spent all night watching these giant robots, drinking sangria and getting excited because they were illustration and art students and they loved the imagery. And they went out and they bought up everything they could find in the little town next day. And luckily for us, although probably not very popular in Japan, all those French companies and Japanese, Spanish companies and Italian companies couldn't afford to either import goods from Japan or get manga translated. It was still a tiny, tiny industry, and they were getting these things in and subtitling them or dubbing them as cheaply as they could. But they couldn't afford to import manga and translate manga, so they just made their own goods illegally on site. So you could buy toys and you could buy comics in Spanish based on Mazinger Z and all these other great Japanese animated robot stories. So they brought some home, and when Steve and I met, he showed me this stuff and said, this is actually Japanese, even though it's in Spanish. Made no difference to me because I spoke no Spanish and no Japanese. He said, look how cool it is. And I looked how cool it was, and I thought, I've got to find out more about this stuff. Now, at the time, I'd worked for the National Library and I still had a lot of friends in the library. So I was in a really good position with the whole resources of the British Library at my hands to find out anything that was available on anime and manga and Japanese pop culture. And there wasn't anything. Like literally, there was no book on anime or manga in English, in French, which I read well, in Spanish, which I don't read, but I thought there might be a book because it's out there, or in Italian, which I read really appallingly, but I read Latin well, so I can do Italian except for the verb tenses, which are an absolute mare. Sorry, Italian, you're a beautiful language, but I can't get my head around your verb tenses. So then I thought, this is stupid. There can't not be a book. I grew up with public libraries. My parents, like most people's parents, were always saying, if you don't know it, get a book. And I thought, I can't get a book. There's this wonderful thing, and I can't get a book. This is wrong on a fundamental level. So I went out and I said to myself, if there isn't a book, I better write one, haven't I? Now, this was so stupid. I cannot tell you how stupid this was, because I didn't know anything about publishing except from the librarian point of view, that you contact publishers, you acquire books, you catalogue them, you lend them to people. And in those days, of course, we're talking 81, the internet was in its infancy and most people didn't have it. In those days, the way you contacted publishers was you got a list of publishers from a publication about the industry, and you wrote letters to them or telephoned them. So that was a marathon to begin with. And then you either got rejection letters from them, of which I got tons. No interest in this subject. We've never heard of it. There wouldn't be any point. Or you got a meeting with them with great difficulty, and then they said the same thing to your face. So it actually took me 12 years to publish my first book. And it wasn't the book I wanted. The book I wanted was what became the Anime Encyclopedia. I wanted a big fat book that would tell me the names of all these really cool shows, whether they were made for TV or whether they were movies or made for video, which was a thing in those days, who directed them, who did the art, who were the actors in them, who were the voices. I wanted that book. I wanted everything that you get now on somewhere like Anime News Network, and it didn't exist. And of course, no sane publisher would let me write a book several hundred pages long on a subject nobody knew anything about. So I started with a little slim 60-page book. We call it a magazine or a MOOC nowadays. I mean, most glossy magazines are thicker than my first book was. And there are less words in my first book than there were in the index to the Anime Encyclopedia when it eventually came out. But it was the book people would buy. And it was called Anime, A Beginner's Guide to Japanese Animation. There's a big picture of it on my website. And it's a lovely little book. But we were so much in our infancy that we had to go to a couple of trade fairs for film and TV to get leaflets from the Japanese, to get pictures to illustrate it, because there was no other way. And we got the designer of the book, his then girlfriend, now wife, was a superb photographer. So we got her to shoot pictures of the toys we managed to accumulate and the phone cards.
That sounds like a real roller coaster, but it sounds like a really fun one in the end.
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, I was doing this. I was trying to sell the book alongside contributing to the growth of British anime fandom. I mean, there were British anime fans here and there in small pockets, but what really got us kick-started was I managed to do a big anime showing, 36 hours over one weekend at the British National Science Fiction Convention at Easter 1990. And that's where most historians now seem to mark the growth of British anime fandom, because we got a lot of people together who had either seen some anime and were glad to meet others, or loved the stuff they saw and wanted to meet others. And so from that, the nucleus of fandom built around that and other conventions, and we gradually got ourselves off the ground. And then, of course, Akira came out in Britain, and that changed everything.
Gosh, absolutely. I kind of wish I was more cognizant, I suppose is the word, of around that time, but I was quite young, I have to admit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But I think many people don't realise how recent this fandom is. And in those terms, it means that we're talking to a lot of people like yourself who are anime fans, were probably always going to be anime and manga fans, but you just didn't have that opportunity. And that was the main reason that fandom was so important. It was so people could find this fantastic outlet into another world.
That's a very good point, because I do remember one of my favourite shows from when I was quite little was Sherlock Hound. And now I'm like, okay, it makes sense.
Miyazaki, yeah, absolutely.
It all comes together in the end. And was it Dogtanian and the Muskehounds? I believe that.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like, well, it was meant to be.
Because, of course, animators around the world, even before the internet, they were aware of what each other was doing. American animators, Canadian animators, Polish animators, Japanese animators, French animators. They saw each other's work at trade shows. They saw each other's work when it came around. They contacted each other. They knew what was going on and they could feed off each other. But the vast majority of the audience thought that animation only existed in their own language because that was all the animation they saw. And now I think it's a much fairer world when you know that outside your own country, your own culture, there are things happening that you still have a right to access because they're part of human creativity.
That's a very good point. I do like how it's become quite interconnected across the world. Mm-hmm. It's just such a lovely thing because, like, I have relatives across the world and we connect on, loving different anime shows and films. So it's just a beautiful thing all around.
Yeah, it really is. And the exciting growth thing now, because anime, of course, has expanded to so many places, and animators in other countries are producing their own works inspired by anime. Africa is the next huge anime territory. African anime, is becoming so big. And although Nigeria, I think at the minute, is the biggest nexus of anime fandom, there's lots of people coming up in Ghana, in Kenya, in other places. It's just so exciting to see a culture that has, on the surface, no connection with Japan, seeing its deep connections with another human culture and embracing that and adding its own impetus to it. That's just thrilling.
Yeah.
China's done it, Malaysia's done it, France has done it, Italy's done it, and now it's the turn of the African nations, and that's wonderful.
It's just such a great thing. And I have seen things, anime-inspired Afrofuturism art pieces on Instagram, and it just blows my mind, and I'm like, this is just the most beautiful thing ever. And as you say, other countries who take it on. I saw a manga book recently based on a Filipino story, and that's quite cyberpunk as well. I need to look that one up actually. And it's just it's one of those things of, like, because it's an art medium, that in a way there's no kind of set recipe to creating it. You can always just take it and change it and use it in different kinds of ways that are relevant to your cultures.
Yeah, and I mean, in fact, the original Japanese animators have always been influenced by culture coming in from outside. And one of the things that I talk about in my new book, The Manga Bible, is I'm trying not to do it as a history of manga in the sense of just a list of dates, because what it is a set of stories of people. But we've got a discussion of the very early days of manga. And then, of course, back in the 1860s, when Japan opened up to the West under force, it was forced to open up to the West. America sailed big gunships into the harbor and said, well, you think what would happen if you didn't do trade treaties? But they opened up and they embraced this. And because the Japanese people were so curious about life outside Japan, they started absorbing all these new things and all these new art forms and all these new influences and making them their own. And it took a while for anime to come out of that. There was a little bit of animation during in the early years. I'm saying a little bit. It was important, of course, but it wasn't particularly an enormous movement. It was a fad for a while that animation started off in Japan. And then, of course, there was the war, and that was a big impact. But after the war, animation was one of the ways that Japan rehabilitated itself culturally, taught about positive things and about the way it wanted to be going forward. Anime and manga became a kind of road to recovery in many ways for Japanese children who've been traumatized by the war. Children are always the worst victims of war because they can't do anything about it. And stories give those children a way to deal and cope with it. And manga and then anime certainly gave Japanese children a way to cope with the changes in their society. And one of the things about looking at that particular period is that you start to see stories emerging of the people, the human beings that took this work forward and that picked it up and ran with it. There there are wonderful stories of mangaka. There's a little boy who lost his family in the bombing of Hiroshima. He and his mother survived, and his mother gave birth to the baby she was expecting a few days after the bomb fell. That baby didn't survive. Many babies didn't survive after that terrible experience. He saw the rest of his family, his father, his little brother, his sister, burned to death in their house. But he grew up determined not to forget that. And by the time he got into his later years, he was able to produce manga on it that told the true story, not the fancy, government accepted story, but the true story of what it was like to be in Hiroshima at that time. And other people followed suit, and they told their true stories. And so through manga, the ordinary people were able to tell the story of what the war had actually done to them. And that I think is wonderful.
I completely agree. I mean, I know exactly who you're talking about. I've got a copy of, I think it's called I Saw It, on my bookshelf.
Yes.
And Barefoot Gen, I haven't started to collect yet, but I've got a long list of manga to get. But definitely, that story is always stuck with me because, it's just such a horrific piece of history, Japan's history, the world's history, and of course the family tragedy, the human level of it, and how you get through it and survive, and how do you work through that kind of trauma.
Yeah, and in a way we see that in Hayao Miyazaki's work as well. Because if you look at his first big breakout feature, Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, that's about a devastating war that destroys almost everything, and then the threat of its revival. And if you look at his series Future Boy Conan, that's about a devastating war that's left absolutely nothing, and how the few remnants of humanity survive. And of course, his more recent stuff, like The Boy and the Heron, is about the real devastating war that he remembers very dimly from his infancy when he was a toddler. And so many, Akira, the whole of Akira, is about, what happens after you drop a nuclear bomb. What happens with this? And Japan is still thinking about that. And again, I've not gone historically through it, but I've got quite a lot in the book about horror, body horror, and generic, outside imposed horror. And a lot of that comes from the bomb.
I'd never considered that. That's a very good point, really. I'll have to look into that. I did actually have a question about the post-war industry bump of manga in Japan, but you've answered it quite beautifully, because just like...
Well, the other thing, of course, is the affordability issue, because any nation that's in a war, we see it now, God help us, we see it now in Gaza, and we see them incapable of stopping it. We see it in Yemen, we see it in all kinds of wars. The problem with the war that those of us who are on the outside looking in can often, just gloss over in our own minds, is that people have no income. They have no jobs. If they have savings, those savings are either massively devalued by the destruction of the country's financial infrastructure, or they very soon run out. And you've got people, ordinary families with work and lives who never thought this would happen to them, are sitting there waiting for somebody to give them a tent and queuing for food rations. That impact is terrifying. And again, you see that quite frequently in anime and manga. You see the problem of complete powerlessness and how you deal with it. And that, I think, is a really interesting thing to approach. In Osamu Tezuka's work, and he made his debut at the age of 18 in 1946, New Year's Day 1946. So he was the age to connect with his generation. He was the age to connect with people slightly younger. And he was telling the stories that they wanted to tell. And a lot of his work was in very cheap, basic magazines, or shared in some serialized in newspapers, some serialized in magazines. So it was cheap to pick up. And kids could read that and they could share it, because it's not like going to a movie. You go to a movie and you've got the memories and it's great, but it costs you money and then you can't go to the movie again. You can only remember it. If you've got a comic book, you can pass it around all your friends, you can swap, you can share. So the money you invest in a comic book, it might be the only 2 or 3 pennies you can spare, but you get mileage out of it. And cheap comic books became so much a salvation for kids. And the other thing that the Japanese did, which I think was brilliant and innovative, is they invented the comic book rental store, the kashihon. They were usually, often sidelines where people sold comic books as well as rented them. But if you didn't have the price of a comic book, but you had a copper, very often the person owning the store would let you rent a copy of that book and sit there and read it. Or if they knew you and trusted you, take it away and bring it back to them. And then you could rent another book. So kids managed to get books where they couldn't manage to get any other form of entertainment or treat. And that was just enormous in rebuilding Japan's morale, because it started with the children who are the future of anywhere. I'd love to take a comic book rental library into Gaza. I don't suppose we'd be allowed to, because it would have to say the right things about everybody and meet everybody's preferences. But I just think if kids could just read comics, it gives them a way out, gives them an escape route.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. That's one of those things of be lovely to have, but it's not very likely. But I know that, of course, there are people out there working to help children, and I'm sure give them entertainment and everything. So
yeah,
one day, hopefully.
One day. But the other thing I think is a lot of people now, when they want to give kids entertainment, they give them a screen.
Yeah, they do.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But a comic book, you don't need power for. You don't need batteries for. You can take it with you anywhere. You can keep it, you can tuck it into your clothes if you have no bag. A comic book is much more accessible than a screen.
Yeah, I mean, back when I was a child, back in the 90s, my mum was like, you can't be bored, you have to entertain yourself, and you can't be watching TV all the time. So I was quite a big reader, and then once I got into anime and manga, and I started to buy, the cheap comics or the graphic novels, she was still all for it, because she's like, well, you're reading.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think there's any bad thing to read as long as it doesn't teach you to hate people.
Yeah.
And I've never found a comic that has actually taught me to hate people. I'm sure they exist, but I've never found one.
Yeah, I mean, I have definitely noticed a bit of a generation gap in terms of I want to say pop culture, but kind of like knowing older references. So for myself, I read a wide range of books of different genres when I was a child, and then on television we would have films from like the 1930s upwards. So I understood things about, say, the Godfather films. Even though I hadn't watched it, I understood bits and pieces about it and why people liked it so much. But nowadays younger people seem to be quite I only concentrate and look at the things that are being put out now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that's a loss, because what we had, and I had it as you had it, but a bit earlier in my childhood, was the ability to tuck those references away in our head. If they weren't any use to us right now, we'd tuck them away, and we'd maybe come back to them later and say, I think I saw something like that in that old film that I watched with my dad. Now, what was it? And it builds you. I was talking to a cabbie in Hastings, who is also a YouTube star, guy called Orangey with a double E on the end. And he's so much fun, and he's fabulous. He does a lot of good work in Hastings for the local community. But he was telling me that the big thing now with YouTube is people putting up clips of anime, the highlights of movies. And he said kids like to watch them, because that way they don't have to watch the whole movie to get to their favourite bit. And my heart broke a little. I get it, and I think that will change as they get older if they still love their favourite movies. But if you're not watching the whole of My Neighbor Totoro, you're only watching the bit where Totoro flies on the top with the girls holding on to him, you're missing out so much.
No, absolutely. It's a very strange thing. I don't understand. Well, did want to get into your new book, the Manga Bible, the Big Beautiful Bible. book.
It's a scary thing, isn't it, to call something the Bible? Raises so many expectations.
Exactly. But yes, I was just really curious about, well, why did you write it? Because when I heard about it, I did have the thought of like, well, she's done the encyclopedia, so what else is there to say, really?
Oh,
But
honestly, I could go on forever about. I want people to write hundreds of books about anime and manga because we need them. There's so much to say. But sorry, go on.
well, first of all, it's just as you mentioned earlier, that you were part of what inspired you to write the Bible was that you really wanted to go into the stories, the depth, individual people. Was there any particular section that you were just really, really gunning to write? Really clear image of it?
I kind of started with a model of a little book I did about 10 years ago called A Brief History of Manga, which I did for Ilex Press, who were then bought by Octopus and Hachette. And that's the reason why they came back for this book. A Brief History of Manga did really, really well, and it was very well reviewed because it's a tiny little book, weighs less than a sandwich, as I always say. And it's about the size of a Marks and Spencer packet. So you can just shove it in your bag, shove it in your pocket. But it's got tons of pictures and it's got tons of information. And when it was published in 2012, bang up to date, we were actually talking about the manga of the British series Sherlock, which was huge in Japan. And they did a manga of it, which is just fabulous. A woman who originated fanzines called Jay did the art, and it's unbelievable. It's gorgeous. But we did that, and it was a big success. But a lot has happened since. And, of course, because that was a tiny, tiny, tiny book, there was a lot of stuff that couldn't go in there. It couldn't get quite as personal. So when I was asked to do this, I thought, it's called the Manga Bible. We had the title to begin with. Let's look at the Bible and what the Bible does. And the Bible is weird. The Bible is one of the funkiest books ever because we think of it mainly in English, but it actually originated in a language nobody speaks anymore, Aramaic, and Greek and Roman, which people speak but in different forms. So it comes to us filtered through centuries of history and language and has needed scholars to dig into it. And some of the original source material for the Old Testament is so old that even the greatest scholars don't know the meaning of particular words and particular things. What were common proverbs 3,000 years ago in what is now Israel and Palestine are now incomprehensible to us. So it's not only the guidebook of the Christian group of faiths. It is the history and the background and the repository of the ancient Jewish faith, which is now practiced in some very different forms by modern Jews, but which was also, until his death, the faith of the person who is regarded as the founder of Christianity. And the Bible, historically, is riddled with contradictions and mistranslations and historical anomalies. So I thought, I couldn't say I am going to write the definitive book on manga. That would be stupid. My Japanese isn't anywhere near good enough. My background reading isn't anywhere near good enough. It's a huge topic. If anybody ever does write the definitive book on manga, they're going to be Japanese. But I don't think anyone now could do it because it's so huge. But a Bible, I can write a Bible because the Bible itself gives me all those historical and translation problems. And it's still managed to be a useful book. So I thought, great, I can own that title and I can do that properly and I can go into it as well as I can. And the errors that are there, I am only making the same kind of errors as the transcribers and translators and historians of a 3,000 or 4,000 year old book transformed across generations. And all the articles of faith in there, all the cults, because there are cults in manga scholarship, believe me, all the cults and all the arguments and all the disagreements, are mirrored in the original, so I can put them in there. So I wanted to stay from the word go, going back to, how did I write it? There are a lot of disagreements about manga, about the history of manga, about the origins of manga, about the influences of manga, and all of them can be right. They can't all be the only right thing, but all of them can be right, because history depends on two things. It depends on the amount of material you have available and the lens through which you view it. So we can present different scholarly ideas about manga, and they can all be right. And we can also present different fan ideas and fan fads and fan theories about manga, and they can also all be right, because manga doesn't draw boxes around us. It lets us run. And that was what I mostly wanted to do. So I thought, let's pick up, yes, we'll talk about its very early development and its influences from all over Europe, because, of course, we flooded into Japan, took it over, bullied it, bossed it, tried to colonize it. And it took all our influences the same way India has, the same way Africa has, from Belgium, from Germany, from France, from Britain, from America. And it made its own things of them. So we talk about that. And then we talk about the war and the recovery. But then let's go and look at what fans experience in manga today. Let's look at shonen and seinen, and let's look at shoujo and the genres that embrace older women and very old people. And let's look at science fiction, which is what SF and fantasy are most Western manga, but they're not by any means all of manga. And then let's look at ecchi and hentai, and let's look at body horror, and let's look at kaiju, because you can't not do kaiju in manga. And let's look at sport. And let's look at Japanese politics and Japanese history reflected in manga. And then let's go into fandom and talk about Japanese fandom and how it developed, and talk about Western fandom and the ecosystem. And that, of course, means we have to talk about manga museums, which leads into manga scholarship. And then there's an astonishing book that I used as the foundation for a chapter called The Money Magnates and the Media Mix. Great scholar called Mark Steinberg did a book called Anime's Media Mix, in which he essentially says the reason why anime has developed as it has in Japan and been so strong and so successful is it has looked at all the new media opportunities coming up across the board: manufacturing, catering, hospitality, retail, travel, train services, toys, sweets, goods, clothing. It's looked at every possible example of media. And so from the very beginning, you got Osamu Tezuka, before Astro Boy was a cartoon, doing it as a live action TV series and radio dramas. Princess Knight was a successful radio drama for many, many years before the anime came along. And then you get into musicals, not just the Takarazuka Theatre, which is huge, but also stage musicals run by basically owned by the production companies that did the anime. Prince of Tennis has something like, I think, 25 or 30 musicals, and they've aged out 11 casts because they have to be the same age, the same age as the characters. So obviously an actor can only play a character as long as he can convincingly be that character on stage. So hence Prince of Tennis, 11 casts, and fans have their favourites and they argue over who's the best. Sailor Moon, 40 musicals. Fans have their favourites and they argue over who's the best. It's just astonishing. And now, of course, we're at the stage where that media mix is beginning to be picked up all over the country. And then right at the end, I've got a chapter that I really love where it's very partial because we were very short on space. Even with 300 odd pages, with all we had to do, we were short on space. But there's a chapter which we call the Good Guru Guide, in which I recommend a few personal favourite scholars with different viewpoints and podcasts and books and blogs and stuff like that, and say to people, just go in, read these books, but read the bibliographies and see the books that the people who wrote the books consulted, and that will give you so much more. And listen to the podcasts and then follow up the guests and see what they've done. So really, what I had the chance to do was put the whole ecosystem, the evolution and the history and the development and some hints about the future and how transgenerationality is affecting manga. And I think, when I looked at the book at the end, I thought, really, as an analogy for the Bible, this title isn't that bad, because it has the faults, the limitations, and the wonderful subject matter to drive forward through all of those historical limits and do something good. So I'm really kind of proud of it.
Well, yeah, you've put it all together. So yeah, definitely be proud of that. So yes, with the Manga Bible, you obviously, this is like your, I want to say, 7th book now?
14.
14? Okay, I was quite...
Yes. They haven't all been on anime and manga directly, although most of them have had some kind of relation. I've done 2 books on how to draw.
Yes.
One on drawing manga, which has great artists in it giving tips, and one on just drawing. And I've done a book called Manga Cross Stitch, which I absolutely adore, because I'd seen so many cross stitches that have been ripped off work, and I wanted to do a book that would give people the tools to design their own manga-inspired cross stitch. So instead of making a chart and putting it on the internet and selling it that wasn't theirs, they could make charts that were theirs and let their own creativity run free.
Yes, I need to pick up a copy. But yes, with your new book, just you have quite a good track record now. I suppose you're kind of like one of like the higher academic recommendations, as it were, on anime and manga. And as you said at the beginning, there were no kind of reference or any kind of academia on anime or manga at all, because in the UK it was definitely not well known at the time. And for myself, as I've been getting more into the kind of behind the scenes and history of manga, I've looked around for academic sources, so I know to like research and try and find all kinds of different sources. But even now I do find that for things such as reference books, academia, and those kind of higher education sort of texts, it's still quite niche. It seems to be a niche of a niche nowadays. But how do you feel like it's that kind of side of things has changed in the past few decades?
Well, the first few years when I was first researching, it was really difficult because there was no work. There was, in fact, one academic paper on manga, which was analysing a specific manga volume done in Texas in 1977. But it was done by an anthropologist, and she was mostly interested in it from an academic anthropological point of view. So she wasn't really telling us much about it that way. She was telling us what was in there, how she viewed the art from her perspective, but not much. But what's been the wonderful thing is that as knowledge of anime and manga has spread, so many young academics all over the world have come through the ranks from being manga fans and anime fans in school. They've thought, I love this stuff. And when I ran magazines, Anime UK magazine, and when I used to do my Barbican presentations, because I did a weekly series there a couple of times a year for about 7 years, I'd get kids coming up to me, and literally kids, 14, 15-year-olds, and saying, I love this stuff and I really want to do it. And everybody in school is telling me it's stupid. Everybody in school is telling me, don't do this. There's no career in it. It won't do anything. And my advice to them was always, what sort of career do you want? What sort of job do you want? Do you know what your interests are? Are you going to be drawing? Are you going to be writing? Are you going to want to keep your options open? And then suggesting that they actually do what their teachers told them to do. Take a foreign language. It could be Japanese. If you don't fancy Japanese, it could be French or Italian, which both have good anime stocks there. Or learn fine art. Learn how to draw in the classical fashion. You can still draw manga when you're not at school, and it won't do your work any harm to actually know all about what fine art is and what the principles are. So I spent quite a lot of time advising people that asked me those questions about underground ways that they could get rid of the hassle of people saying to them, you are stupid for doing this stuff, and still go on and do it. And look, if you want to do something that will really impress your toffee-nosed school, why don't you do an episode of Dragon Ball in Latin as a play script, and ask them to let you do it? And they can't complain about that because you've got to do Latin anyway. So you're translating Dragon Ball from English into Latin, and you're saying, we will put this on as a play. Impress all round. You know, there are ways you can do this. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how can you be devious and how can you actually do the things that you want to do while not upsetting your parents and your teachers, who, to be fair, only want the best for you. And at the minute, they can't see where we believe this stuff is going. So do what you have to do alongside what you want to do, and you will never, ever lose out. And thank God, so many people have come back to me since and said, I am now a lecturer here. I now own my own business and do graphic design here. I now do this, that, and the other. And it's worked for them. So I think what we have to do is, I always think of, Bruce Lee is one of my favorite philosophers. I think Bruce Lee was brilliant. And he copied many Japanese philosophers in saying that you use the force that comes against you, don't copy, but derive from them. He was their pupil. You use the force that comes against you and you turn it on itself so that your objectives are achieved by using the energy of the people who fight you. And that, I think, is a really good one. Water, you know, the old earth, fire, water, air. Water always follows the path of least resistance. Always. It finds any small channel and it goes into that channel and it reshapes that channel to itself. So you be water. You start small, but you stay strong. And that's the way you do it. And having mentioned that, there's a wonderful group online, a wonderful website called Manga and Anime Studies. And it's got interdisciplinary fields. It's got all sorts of people doing things. It's got a website that lists all academic publications from that first 1977 one all the way on. So they're now with the web and with broadband, there's so many ways people can find out about connecting with academic anime. And there are so many resources for teachers. And now we have colonized academia. Anime and manga fandom has got our own people in there who are making progress and who know the value of what we do. And that's fantastic.
It really is. It's such a beautiful thing. As you were speaking, I was just thinking of one of my colleagues at work. We've spoken a bit about anime, and he's not a huge fan, but he was a big fan of Marine Boy back in the 70s. He told me about that. And nowadays, even though he's not really into anime, he likes to see clips every now and then of opening animations for TV shows, because he gets a lot of inspiration, you know, for like the color stories and presentation and references and all of that. I recently showed him the opening of Cyberpunk Edge Runners, and he was absolutely blown away. He loved every single aspect of it. And yeah, I can definitely see how the references and influence kind of reflects in his work, like not just at our company, but his own freelance work as well, because he really likes to push the envelope. And it's like, I can see where you get all these kind of inspirations from. It's amazing. It kind of sneaks in everywhere.
Well, that's it. Well, a friend of mine many years ago at a convention, this was in the 90s, said that when we will know we've achieved our aims, when there are no more anime fans, when people just see anime the way they just see films. In the 30s, people used to call themselves movie fans. Nobody calls themselves a movie fan now because everybody goes to the movies. He said, in the same way, when everybody watches anime and we've got total cultural penetration, that will be when we achieve our aim. And world domination is only a step away.
One day. One day. I did want to get your opinion on something. Well, back when I first got into anime in the mid-90s, it was still, you know, quite underground, and what was popular that was coming over to us on the UK in the, you know, the import market or sometimes the Sci-Fi Channel, it was usually science fiction lots of cyberpunk, which I still have a big interest to this day. And, since it's become a little bit more mainstream, I have noticed that the popular pieces that come over to the UK now and on the internet is kind of shifted into shonen battle series. And I do kind of wonder, like, I'd love to get your opinion on why do you think that's happened, how that happened.
Well, anime and manga both, their biggest market is junior high school and high school boys and college guys. They have a big women's market, but it tends to exist independently, which is, really strange. But there you go. But the main money market is that like 10 to 20 boy market. Partly because in many countries, boys get more indulged. So grandparents and parents buy them more stuff. Partly because men have more disposable income than women still. After all these years of women carrying half the world, men are richer than we are in every regard. But also because for many, many years, the vast majority of workers in these things were men. In fact, one reason why women's manga gained ground very, very quickly, more quickly than anime aimed at women, is that it was easier for women to make manga because they could do it at home in their spare time. Whereas to make anime, you had to get a job in a studio. And in the beginning, in the early years of the studio system, women would be told that they could only work on finish and cleanup and colouring because women were good at doing neat, helpful things, but they weren't creative. And they were told that they would retire when they married. Not, we assume you'll retire when you get married, but you will retire when you marry. And a few heroic women fought back against that tooth and nail. But for those women who didn't have the strength to do that fight every day, and God knows, I don't blame anyone for not wanting to spend their entire working life fighting. It was actually much easier to do your creative work at home. And Japan made it easy because manga magazines very quickly realized that manga fans were drawing manga, and they could recruit those manga fans through competitions. And manga magazines for both boys and girls had regular competitions that you could send your work into. And also, Japan very quickly, from about the mid-70s on, built up a network of local fairs culminating in Comiket, where fans could go and sell their own work to each other. So those get trawled to this day by publishers looking for new talent and new ideas. So there were ways that women could actually put their work out there without having to go into a hostile office context. But still, the majority of manga are made for men. And that's the reality. We're working on it, but we have to live with it for the moment. And the majority of manga and anime coming into Britain are for men because the company that first introduced them, Island World Communications, then Manga Video, knew it had a big teen and 20 male market for its records and its other output. And so it went for that market with anime and manga because it knew it could sell. I remember one of the execs once said to me, well, there isn't a girls' market. And we were at an event that they'd run, which had loads of girls in it. And I said, excuse me? Yeah, they're probably here with their boyfriends. Well, yes. But, for that reason, Western consumption in Britain and in America is very skewed to the male side of the algorithm. But there's a lot more anime and manga out there, and we just got to keep pushing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just quite an interesting thing how like Battle Shonen has kind of taken over. But there's so many different areas of anime that, could become popular. It's just, I feel like
to many people born in this century, anything made before 2010 is ruled out on technical grounds. They just find it boring to watch and too difficult because they're used to contemporary animation. And luckily, it does sometimes happen that they change their views on that as they get older and more engaged. But for the moment, it is a viewpoint that will get them a huge amount of young male viewing. And that's what pays for your clicks, isn't it? It's a money thing. Being controversial almost always works online.
Oh, yes.
Being aggressive and taking an aggressive stance almost always works online. And if you're in it for the short game, and goodness knows, I mean, didn't Lamy just sell his company for something crazy like $725 million?
Oh, yeah.
If that's where you're going, that's one way to get there.
Yeah.
It depends what you want.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we get pleasure out of a huge variety of things. All humans do. And I tend to think personally that while it would be very nice to have $725 million, I don't dispute that for a minute, it's very nice to have a brain and a memory that are stocked with things that still give me pleasure now and that will continue to give me pleasure while they both function. So, it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? It's what you want to achieve in this world and what you value in this world that define what media you will value in this world.
Absolutely. Well, because you have written on both, I wanted to ask you, who do you prefer, Tezuka or Miyazaki?
It's a very difficult choice, and I would probably throw a few other people into the mix if I had to make a single choice. But I always remember the great Canadian actress Lois Maxwell, who played Miss Moneypenny in the 20th century James Bond films. She was actually Ian Fleming's personal favourite for Moneypenny. She said she was once asked whether she preferred Sean Connery or Roger Moore as Bond. And she said, I would have had Sean as a lover and Roger as a husband. And I think that was a very, very good thing. So I would say I would have had Miyazaki as a husband and Tezuka as a lover. Tezuka is unpredictable and wild and exciting and stupid and goofy and enormously interested in everything. Miyazaki is massively creative, loves nature, has very strong opinions to which he's getting more and more attached, and he's out of the house most of the time anyway. I mean, the Miyazaki marriage, which obviously we're not all privy to, but from things that he's written, it's obvious that marriage has actually consisted of a very short period of time sandwiched in between the absolute priority of work. So I think if you were going to say choose one for fun and one for solid long-term commitment, you might choose Tezuka for fun and Miyazaki for commitment, because you always know what you're going to get with Miyazaki. You never know quite what you're going to get with Tezuka. But I mean, really, I couldn't choose between them because they're both so different and they're so much fun. So I would say I would have them both. In fact, I might have them both as lovers and marry Satoshi Kon.
You're a woman who wants it all.
Why not?
Absolutely. Okay. So why do you keep coming back to anime? What is it that keeps bringing you back into that world and writing about it?
Any topic that you choose, from the history of Regency England to the trade in cinnamon from the Spice Islands in the 16th century, has the potential to be a lifelong commitment. It just depends whether you're lucky enough to find that topic and engage with it at a depth when it can catch you. I came to anime and manga very late. I was 30 years old when I first saw it, and I understood that I was seeing it, and I was over 40 when I wrote my first book. But luckily, that meant that I had spent the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, which were some of the best years to have fun in Britain, just having fun, just not being committed to anything, just doing the day job and enjoying myself outside. So when I was ready to find a serious commitment, both personally and professionally, I found my partner, an anime and manga. And I thought, yeah, this will do. This is the rest of my life. But without those 30 years of going wild first, who knows? Who knows what might have happened? I was so lucky. I grew up in the north of England at a time when the north of England was the pop culture capital of the world. And then I moved down to live in London when London was still swinging and still holding on. And so it was great. And I found this at the right time. And I always say to people, if you haven't yet found the thing that really lights you up and really makes you want to do the awful slog of getting turned away from doors and having to scrummage around and having to work huge hours with dictionaries and translations and checking things, don't worry. You may never find it, and your life won't necessarily be any worse for it. But when you do find it, just make sure you've done a lot of good things first so you can give 100% commitment, because that can come along at any time in your life. I mean, there are lots of great artists didn't begin to make their art in any medium until they were very old. Lots of great writers didn't manage to shake off family commitments and obligations and find time to write till they were in their 40s, 50s, 60s. Humans are endlessly creative. While we function, we always have time. And I'm really grateful that after a very, very enjoyable early life, doing nothing in particular, but just having fun the way people do, I've managed to find a later life which has given me so much fulfillment and joy and pleasure. I think I would recommend that. If you haven't found what strikes your heart yet, don't give up. You know, there's plenty of time. You can do it. Look at Grandma Moses, the American painter. She actually had a career in art that many people would have said was impossible for a woman from her rural working class background, a woman and her age, and yet she still turned around and did it. We've got time. This has been such a lovely interview. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's no problem. It's my pleasure. Oh, I do have like a very quick half question for you. Mm-hmm. What are you watching or reading right now?
Well, right now, I am taking a complete break from anime and manga because I've not only done the Manga Bible, I've revised my Miyazaki book, which will be out later this year. So I've been rewatching and introducing my partner to Downton Abbey, which is, you know, it's wonderful. It's as complete a change of pace as you can get. And what I shall be doing tonight, of course, along with a lot of other people I know, is I'll be watching the beginning of series 4 of Bridgerton, which is, can't wait. I love Bridgerton. But on into fun, I actually just like seeing what's opening up any channel, seeing what's new and just playing around with it. Just having fun with it, just doing nothing with it, just, you know, kicking back with a drink and a pile of crisps and the way we all do it. So I'm not sure what that will be, but it'll be fun when I get to it. But for now, I need a couple of weeks brain break, so it's Downton and Bridgerton.
Well, I completely understand. Your brain must be slightly cooked now.
Yeah, it is a bit. Yeah.
Oh, fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Helen. Yeah.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. It was so kind of you to invite me.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. And yeah, it's just very kind of you to accept. Well, there you have it, folks. Once again, a great big thank you to Helen for agreeing to have a lovely chat with me. I have to say this was my first time interviewing somebody, and Helen was just a complete delight, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it too. The Manga Bible is now available through Helen's webpage, on Amazon, or anywhere you prefer to get your books from, so I highly recommend you just buy it. It's an amazing read. I've also linked Helen's socials in the description, so check her out and send her love. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. I've got a lot of videos planned for the future, and I just have so many topics that I want to cover. So subscribe to come along on the journey of discovery with me. But for now, you all have a lovely day and take care of yourselves. Bye!